previously in episode 10.
We're all unsure of what's next.
Right.
I think it's important because of uncertainty, and there is a lot of it in our field, is to make sure the skills that you've been acquiring and honing for years have other applications in other fields besides theater.
Welcome back to episode 11, The Rooted Gardener. We taped our episode June 2021. I hope you enjoy.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Bowie Teaches podcast. As we say here at Bowie Teaches, in a galaxy of learners, Bowie Teaches lights the way. As our host Tanya Busico says to her students, come on in, relax, we'll be here a while. Let's get started.
So today we have Dr. Vernon J. Hurte. He serves as the Vice President of Student Affairs at Towson University in Maryland. Prior to joining Towson University, Dr. Hurte served as Associate Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Students at Iowa State University. Prior to joining Iowa State University, Dr. Hurte served on the Student Affairs staff at both the College of William & Mary, which is where we met, and the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Dr. Hurte also served as senior pastor of the historic New Light Baptist Church in Richmond, Virginia. But let me tell you how I met Dr. Hurte. So I would say this is probably like 2008 or 2007, maybe even 2006. But I remember being at the College of William & Mary and having a hard time. And one of my great friends at the time introduced me to Dr. Hurte. We called him Vernon at the time. And she said that he's someone that I needed to talk to. You know, it's so important when you want to begin a discernment process to be able to have someone that could give you the space to help you think beyond the confines of what you know. And so I am grateful for that. And we've stayed in contact, of course. When I talk to not only Dr. Hurte, but a lot of my mentors, it is so powerful, not only thinking about the impact that they have on my life and others, but also how they've moved in their career and how they've, completed such amazing task while still being open enough and having enough I'll say creating space in their schedule to continue to have conversation. So let's get started. So my first question to you, Dr. Hurte, is how are you?
I'm doing well. First of all, Tanya, it's good to see you. I'm still burning, so that's cool with me. And I'm just really proud of all the work that you've done and the way that you have allowed your gifts to have impact and really to lift up the world in so many great ways. So it's good to be able to reconnect and have this conversation with you. I am, I'm good. I'm good. This last 15 months have been a challenge for all of us as you kind of navigate the pandemic, and so I'm glad to see some kind of light at the end of the tunnel now. Looking forward to just having a good summer of recharge and rejuvenation because the navigating the pandemic was just really challenging. So I came to Towson University last February, and so I had about a month before the stay-at-home order and everything was kind of shut down. So I've really been living this kind of pandemic life in this new role. And so I'm looking forward to really switching it up some. And then personally, I moved here without my family. So my family, for the first probably 3 or 4 months, new job, navigating the pandemic, in a new community without family.
Right.
It was challenging. And so when the summer came and we were all reunited and made that final move from Iowa to Maryland. That was great. That was great. And so, despite it all, doing well. I really can't complain.
Thank you. But let's talk a little bit about your journey as a student. So can you tell us a little bit about either secondary school, college? What were you like as a student?
Sure. I'll kind of go secondary and lead into college because it was really similar. I was a very I was a very focused student,
Okay.
and I wouldn't say I was as well rounded as I could have been, and I'll kind of make sense of that. I was always academically focused,
Hmm.
partly because that was just a drive in my family. So my grandmother, I was primarily raised by kind of jointly by my mom and my grandparents, and my grandmother was a teacher.
Oh.
She taught at Blackwell Elementary School in Richmond for many years. So
Mhm.
she drove education. I was
Right.
surrounded around that. And I happened to be a part of a church community that there were so many examples of kind of educated Black leaders. So
Right.
that really shaped my perspective in many ways. I was also an athlete, but
Really?
I didn't put a lot of time into that because
Mm-hmm.
I was driven academically. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
that's great, but you gotta get the grades. You gotta get the grades. But
Mm.
interestingly enough, I played football. I played basketball. I don't know if
Okay.
you remember the whole hoop it up thing. In Richmond, it was the 3-on-3 tournament.
Yes, yes,
I did that
yes.
with some of my boys every summer.
Wow.
I have a black belt in Taekwondo, so I've always been
Wow.
an athlete, but you kind of shape to focus in different ways.
Right.
So that's why I said I did other things, but I wasn't well rounded in the sense that I invested in non-academic things in the same way that I
Mhm.
invested in academic life. And so at this stage in my career, it's interesting that I invest more energy and time in non-work things
Mm.
just because I feel like I've put in work. I've
Right.
arrived at a certain point in my career. And
Mhm.
so now I want to invest in the fun, and not
Okay.
necessarily the fun I missed out on, but the things that are fun for me now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Would you like to elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, 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 yeah. So, I mean, travel. I love to travel. And that's part of my self-care as well. And I love the Caribbean, partly because water is very peaceful for me. So I love the beach, I love the ocean. Things I just take time to enjoy in life now that probably in my early adulthood, I
Mhm.
was I was so focused on the grind
Right.
that I didn't take the time always to invest in a more balanced life.
Right, right. That makes sense. And then you've achieved so much, so you're able to also have the time to take off work and to be able to do that because I think for a lot of students who, I mean, and it's difficult at 18, 19 to figure out balance
Yeah.
um, because sometimes, students travel a little bit too much or um, they they're too much on the academic side, like you're saying. And so that's great that you're able to find balance and that's that traveling is one of your self-care routine, so to speak. But thinking about your studies and you coming from such a strong you had so many great examples of Black leadership. What motivated you to be able to leave your home of Richmond for your studies?
Uh, I knew Richmond. I spent my whole life in Richmond. In terms of my upbringing, never lived anywhere else. I spent, probably half of my childhood in Highland Park, and
Okay.
then half of the childhood in Fulton. And so that's what I knew. I knew Richmond. And
Right.
so when the time came time for college, um, I knew that I wanted to have an opportunity to kind of go away. Um,
Mm,
and my dream was always Morehouse College. So
okay.
Morehouse, I got in, and
Mhm.
but that tuition cost was
Yeah.
a little high, and so
Yes.
and I came, from a family that just didn't have the means like that. They would have done whatever it took to make it happen for me. But I had an opportunity to go to Bowie State University on a full scholarship, and so I
Okay.
made the decision to go to Bowie State. and I never regretted it because it was life changing for me professionally, and that I had faculty who were just amazing,
Mm-hmm.
and I happened to meet this really insightful and beautiful and incredible classmate who
Mm-hmm.
lived across the hall from me in a suite, and
Mm-hmm.
um, talked her into marrying me. And this
Yes.
summer, 20 years later, we're still together, and two
Mm-hmm.
kids later. So making that decision was actually transformative for me, and I wouldn't change anything.
I appreciate you. Thank you for that. And I appreciate you um pointing out that yes, you can have a dream school, but that finances are a real thing. And I think that we hear so much about student loan debt and there are trillions, but I think to your other point that your family would have done whatever they had to do. I think as 18 and 19-year olds, or just even young adults, we don't at the time always think about the cost to our family. And so for you to be able to have that sense of maturity and discernment to say that it's not worth it at this point, not to say that you could not have landed in the same place that you are now having gone there, but because that experience was so impactful, that I think a lot of times when people don't go to their first choice, that they think, oh, my life is over, but really it could be the opening to a new path. And so I just really, no one has said that yet this season, and that is just so powerful.
Yeah, I am really, to an extent, I am really bought into this idea of growing where you're planted.
Mm.
I think that there is opportunity for growth in any context. Now, you have to have the level of awareness to know when that context is no longer a space that is fertilizing you and that is feeding you in the way to grow. But I think that that anybody can grow pretty much in any space for a particular season. And
Right.
so I think that's important. So when you talk about college selection, when you talk about a job, whatever the case may be, um, it may not be your dream, but it's very likely a context where you can grow. And if you got that mindset, you might potentially grow in ways that you would not have grown in that other space. And so but
Mhm.
if you have the mindset that I can only grow and develop, I can only progress in this box, then
Right.
you limit yourself.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that leads me to our next section about genius and purpose. Um, that's good though. The grow where you're planted. I think that wow, that's really good. Like I have these moments in the conversation where I really take it in, because what I hear you saying or I'm interpreting is also this idea too that like for me, your dreams can change when you grow where you're planted. And what you thought was your pinnacle and what you thought was your, you know, I made it, you it could be something else.
Yep. Yep.
And so until you go through those spaces, you won't learn those lessons.
Yep. Yep.
Um, and that leads us to purpose.
Yeah.
Oh, or were you going to say something? I'm
I,
sorry.
I would just say, and what you just said made me think about that. That's really the sign of growth. Because if your dreams and your goals never change, then have you really evolved? Have you really grown from the space that you were? And so I know for me, goals, kind of how I view myself, what I see, in terms of possibilities, have just constantly changed, from when I was 18 going to college to now being 42.
Right.
There's some similarities, there's some things that have remained constant, but
Hmm.
as I've been exposed to more, as I've experienced more, as I've seen more, you see more possibilities. And if you don't allow yourself to see more possibilities, that's probably a sign that you haven't allowed yourself to grow.
Right. Oh, that's good. That's good. That's really good. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, what I thought about at 18, I would have never thought I would be a professor at 18. I was like, no, I don't want to do that. And now at 34, my dream when I was at William and Mary was to work in Hollywood. And I used to, there's a place behind Yates Hall in William and Mary. Like if you go to what they call Old Campus, and it's like these little hills.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I sprained my ankle my first year, the spring of my first year. And I used to hobble around with my crutch, but I would always be on the phone and say that when Hollywood calls me, they're going to say that was Tanya's dorm room. But, you know, at 18, it was just a wish. And at
Right.
34, to be able to begin to walk in a maturity and to finally get that call that I always wanted, I was ready for it.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
at 18, I wasn't ready for it. I didn't have the confidence for it. I didn't have the experience for it. And life teaches you that. And I wasn't sure about my purpose and how that dream really fit into my purpose. But with that being said, what is your purpose or genius or gift if
Yeah.
you separate them?
So I would describe it as authentic coaching / coaching for authenticity.
Okay.
So it's the two-part there. So being authentic as a coach, one of the things I've learned is that in mentor relationships in particular, there have been relationships like ours, for example, that have lasted for years.
Right.
Because I have been able to be authentic.
Right.
And I've tried to create space for that person, in this case, you, to be authentic. And when that meshes, there becomes a long-term kind of, connection. And I have, colleagues, friends who were my students.
Yeah.
And our relationship has evolved over the years where they're friends, where we're laughing at memes. I'm sending memes,
Yes.
and he's sending me memes. Our relationship has evolved to that because of the authenticity in the relationship and the continued investment there. So I think part of my giftedness is being that and trying to encourage that and create that space for others to be that. And that doesn't always happen. Sometimes, there are folks that's not feeling that. They're not feeling real, and that's okay, because that's not what they're looking for. But I've seen some really great, mutually beneficial relationships evolve because of that authentic dynamic.
And how would you say you discovered it?
I think sometimes it's failures in relationships, and now looking at it, it's not a failure. But at that time, when I was early in my career, I was like, why is it that some students really feeling me, and there's some students who will avoid me, or some students who just don't want to. I took that as failure early on. But then as time went on, I realized, no, there's something that it's a fit thing. It's a connection thing. And there's some people who appreciate certain things, certain dynamics, and there are others that don't. And it's not a failure or success thing. It's just a reality. It's a relationship reality, and it's a fit thing. And so it really came through that, feeling failure, but reflecting on that and kind of reframing it a bit.
Yeah, that's great. I felt that way when I first started teaching too. It's like, I'm giving my all to y'all. Like I am leaving the classroom spent. And some students didn't even respond to emails. I was like, what is this? But you're absolutely right. It is about fit. And I would also say, in terms of coaching, it is so interesting like how you talk about mentor mentee relationships, and how I realize, like, there are some people I know that don't like mentors because
Mhm.
they don't want to be coached, or people don't mentor. And so I think that, to your point, for people that are wondering, like, if they do feel that what you do and who you are is similar to their purpose and gifting, how was it confirmed for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think others confirm. So you look at, and this is both a spiritual and a practical lens.
Hmm.
You look at fruit, and
Right.
sometimes it takes time for fruit to develop, but it's the
Right.
fruit that really gives you the evidence. And so over time, you see the evolution of the folks that you've invested in, and they've invested in your growth. So I've tried to invest in Tanya
Right.
over the years, but Tanya has invested in me
Hmm.
because I've become better. I've become a better human. I've become more insightful because you have a lens and experience that's shared with me that makes me
Right.
better. And so over
Right.
time, you start to see the fruit. You see the fruit in yourself. You
Right.
see the fruit in those that you've invested, time in, and
Mhm.
kind of been in a relationship in. And then that confidence comes with that okay, I'm in the space that I was purposed and created to be in.
Right. That's good. And it's funny you say that, because um part of the reason that I was able to even um apply for some things that I've applied for lately was because of my students, former students who became my teaching assistants. And it was their belief in my dream
Mhm.
that was like, not that you're and it wasn't a thing of like, you don't need to teach, but the reality was that they saw more in me, even as my students.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was such a powerful conversation. It was just like an almost an out of body experience for them to pour into me, um, based on what I had poured into them. And they were mirroring back not only what I said, but just how they saw me. And I think that, to your point about that symbiotic relationship with mentees and mentors, we don't spend enough time thinking about that. Or I'm not going to say we, I can't assume. I know that I don't always think about that,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
until I have, these kinds of conversations.
But I think a lot of people don't. And to the point you just raised and highlighted a really important point. And language matters. And
Right.
one of the reasons that some have rejected mentorship is because they haven't been mentored, or the language amount mentorship needed to evolve. And so when you look at the literature from a research standpoint,
Mhm.
so much of the language was around this idea of mentor and protege. And over the years, I've really rejected that because what that describes is almost a recreation of self. So if I'm a
Right.
protege, then one, it may appear as though my purpose as your protege is to boost you, or my purpose
Yes.
as your protege is to become a mirror image of you.
Right.
Whereas true mentorship, in my view, is about how can I support you, invest in you in a
Right.
way that helps you be your best self, whatever way you define that. That's
Right.
really the true mentorship. And so if you haven't experienced that, it's high likely that you would reject that. Because I rejected it at
Mm.
times where I wasn't experiencing that. It wasn't until I really experienced quality mentorship as a mentee that then you invest in it. And when there's certain things you see. Um,
Right.
I'm very selective now, just because of time, sometimes, and
Right.
energy around you know being a mentor for someone. And one
Right.
of the questions I ask in a more professional way, but will you allow me to check you?
Mm.
Because if you won't allow that, then we can't have a real mentorship relationship.
Yes.
And the reason that's important because I didn't get the benefits of good mentorship until I was at a place where I allowed somebody to check me.
Mm.
But when you know that that person is authentically invested in your growth, you will allow them to check you because you know it's about your growth and it's not about them.
Right. That's good with the checking piece. Yeah. Because I feel like when you talk about your tapestry of life, like for me, my mentors, all of y'all are like on my yellow brick road of life, so to speak. And so I I could not get here without y'all. And that is not to be like extra or, being untrue, but I think mentors help shape and guide you in ways that only they can. And so often I see, particularly with people in their early 30s, who, move beyond, the first year college experience. And I realized with some people who have been my colleagues and peers, it's like, really, you should probably have a mentorship. And it's hard to tell people that
Yeah, yeah,
because no one wants to receive that from their peer to say, like, well, what you're trying to say. But you have to have someone who's been there before you, who has a knowledge and wisdom that you can't see, and that will see that cares enough and is invested enough to help you see your blind spots.
yep, yep, yep. Yeah, success is not solo. I mean, success is just not solo. Nobody makes it, on a solo journey. I would not be in the place that I am now without some really great folks along the way. And some folks were seasonal.
Right.
And then some folks have been from day one all the way through. And then some folks have, they were started day one, about midway, they kicked off and then they've reemerged and they're like purposefully back in space at an important moment. But I can connect, so many important decisions, so many important faith leaps,
Right.
so many important uh, moments of recognition.
Right.
Like, family is so big. My wife is such a big part of the
Yes.
success journey.
Hmm.
And I've become more aware of that as I've gotten older,
Mm.
primarily from a mentor who didn't see that
Mm.
and experienced loss of
Mhm.
relationship because he wasn't aware of that. And so it's something that he really drilled in me to
Right.
say, don't take for granted the importance of family and making sure you're investing in that. And
Right.
it focused me in a way that was, really, really important. And not that I fully arrived. I'll be, honest about that. But as I get older, I'm more intentional and focused about um, how am I honoring and caring for my family in the same way that I honor and care for you know my work.
Right. Right. And to your point about faith leaps, or I guess pushing it a little bit further, because you were a pastor and you're not right now. You went to seminary. Um, how did that theological background as a minister, pastor, or even you as a musician, which I actually found out like randomly when I was in seminary, like I guess people knew you. Well, not yet, people knew you. And I was like, what? But how would you say that faith piece or theological piece influences your role as a college administrator?
Mhm.
Um, because it's well, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. So ministry should be people centered. It doesn't always play out that way. And so that's really the element of ministry. And what we do in higher education is people centered. Our sole purpose is to support students in their growth and development and their journey towards success. So that centering, from a faith standpoint, influences the centering um, around kind of higher education and
Right.
how I do higher education. Um, One of the ways that the seminary experience in particular helped me, because there are limits sometimes in the temple. Um, and what I mean by that is, I have always worked in a DEI space and had that as a lens.
Right.
And one of the ways that seminary was transformative for me was helping me be introduced to broader theological perspective that gave me language to be inclusive. And when I specifically think about, my brothers and sisters and the LGBTQIA plus, community, especially during Pride Month.
Right.
And
We're taping this in June, by the way. Right.
um, that's been huge, as a part of my career.
Now, shifting a little bit to your mentors. So you mentioned that you have mentors.
Mhm.
So are there any mentors that for you have really impacted your life in ways that have just been, the mark has been indelible?
Yeah. Wow. Um, I think so too. My grandfather,
Mm,
and many ways, and I'm very reflective of it now because he has Alzheimer's, and
mm,
so there are elements of that relationship that gets lost over time,
right,
because he's not the same person that he was, and
right.
so I find myself reflecting on memories much more now. And he was just kind of my first example of manhood, of um, having this real presence of respect, having this real commitment to just loving folks and investing in
Right.
folks. And um, he modeled that kind of servant mentality. He was a deacon in the church, and I
Okay.
remember he used to take us, every Christmas. We would, before we were doing anything, or Thanksgiving, before we were doing anything, we were going to the church. We were picking up Thanksgiving baskets and
Yeah.
Christmas baskets, and we're gonna go and deliver that to folks in need before we are doing our stuff. Um, and that was huge.
Right.
That set a tone early on
Mhm.
about the importance of servant leadership, and the
Right.
importance of humility. And he did a lot of stuff behind the scenes, and he didn't need an award, he didn't need his name on the. He just that's how he lived,
Right.
and so that really kind of set a model for me.
Mhm.
Um, and then I have one other that really stood out when I was in graduate school. So this mentor, Anton Reese is his name, Dr. Anton Reese. He's now the president of a community college in Kentucky.
Okay.
Um, but at the time, he had this interesting background. He was in higher education.
Mhm.
He actually did television and radio before
Oh,
going in higher ed. So he just kind of had this presence about him, and he just had
nice.
confidence about him. And he was probably the first non-family member that I allowed to check me. He went out, and I learned that from him, because when he called me a grasshopper, it was like, the grasshopper. Said you still, wet behind the ears and stuff, but he was direct about that, and he was like, you gonna be there, but you're not there yet. There's some things that you need to develop. There's some things I see in you, and my job is to pull it out, to develop it. And so I was like, we talk about that this vision of sitting at somebody's feet and just absorbing it. He had earned a level of respect from me that, I was just trying to be a sponge and just soaking it up. And he just spoke things. He spoke, um, you know, you can be a president. You're gonna be a president. You're gonna, you gotta have the confidence and pull that trigger when you feel it. Don't let anybody, anything kind of, stop you from it. What God has for you it is for you, and you got to trust your gut on it. You prepare, you do the work, but when that moment comes, don't let anybody, don't let your mind start twirling in a way to stop you from moving forward. And so, when it was time to make that move from William and Mary, his voice was a big part of that. I wasn't looking to make a move, but I got approached about the opportunity to go to Iowa State, and I heard his voice saying, "Don't let being in the middle of Iowa, that you've never been there, you're a black man in rural Iowa. Don't let none of that get in your mind, because you got what it takes to." And I heard all that stuff,
Right.
and even now, I look to him. I follow his leadership and some of the things he's done, and really been transformative, and it fuels me, and I continue to reflect on the lessons and the ways he pushed me. So those are two that really,
Right.
really stand out.
Right. And so what I also hear you saying too is that, and the reason why I asked this question is I think with mentorship, with like a lineage, there is a point where I like, now that you said that, now I want to look him up and just to see who influenced you. But I also think it's so important because even at your level of success in higher ed, you still have need for a mentorship, that you've not arrived to the point where you don't need a mentor. That's good.
Yeah,
That's good.
it's never the case. It's in our context, from a ministry context, every pastor needs a pastor. A pastor who doesn't have a pastor is dangerous, in my view. Same thing with leadership. A leader who is unwilling to be led is dangerous.
Right. Right. You're absolutely right. And so now looking ahead, thinking about advice. So there will be listeners on this. There will be people that will listen to the podcast who are students, who may be unsure about what's next. What advice would you give someone? And particularly when we're thinking about, yes, people in general, but also BIPOC people. What
Mhm.
advice might you give?
Yeah. I would say be flexible. Be flexible, because you never know what that transformative experience will be,
Right.
where it might be, and who might trigger it.
Right.
And so really being flexible and being open to experiences, is really, really critical. Um, Recognize that imposter syndrome is real. And I say that not to to hold it up as a limiting factor,
Right.
but by not embrace is probably the wrong word, but by not recognizing that it's real,
Right.
I've seen people miss opportunities because it was imposter syndrome that was causing them not to take steps that they were really well capable in position to make. And so really recognizing that voice that you hear, that feeling that you may hear, it has a name, and this is how it shows up, and you can combat it
Right.
by just recognizing and that it's real, and having that level of awareness. And then the last piece of advice I would say is remain teachable, because to be a leader with longevity and to be a leader that remains relevant,
Mm.
you got to learn from other people,
Right.
because your lens, your experiences all have limits.
Right.
And to be somewhat of a limitless leader,
Right.
that requires you to be able to glean from and tap into the lived experiences of other folks who
Mm-hmm.
you don't have that experience, you don't have that lens.
Right.
And when you kind of remain in your narrow, and no matter how broad our experiences might be, it's all narrow. in
Right.
comparison to the the bigger picture.
Right.
And so to recognize that we all have a narrow lens, and so
Mhm.
in order to have broader impact, we've got to tap into and affirm the lenses and experiences of those around us.
Mhm.
That helps you remain impactful, and I think relevant.
That's good. Those are great. Oh, those are great examples um, of just things that we should pay attention to. But now we're getting to the fun part as we begin to close out the podcast. So the first thing I ask everyone, because I don't assume, so this is where we have the top 5. And when I actually did this with Dr. Kenny, I didn't know that he listened to hip hop. And so I always just and he even like did a freestyle. I was like, okay. Um, but I always asked, so for this section, the top 5. So in hip hop, people are always asked, who are your top 5, dead or alive, no particular order. So before we get to the specific question I have for you, I wanted to know, do you listen to hip hop? Do you have a top 5?
So I have a top 5, not all hip hop top 5, but
Okay.
I've got I'm more old school hip hop. So I
Okay.
would say my kind of hip hop rap contributions to my top 5 would be Biggie and Tupac
Okay. Okay.
would be my 2. My other 3 would be music, but other genres. And
Okay.
that kind of represents who I am and kind of
Okay.
the complexity of who I am. So
Okay. What are the other genre? Who are they? What are the other
I'll
genres?
break the rules a little bit. So Biggie, Tupac are in there. Um, there's a jazz group called Spiral Gyro,
Mm,
um, who I
okay.
absolutely love. And you can check them out. They're musically diverse, and they're representatively diverse in an era, and they have longevity. I think because of that, they have
Right.
longevity, and so
How do you spell that name?
it's SPRA Spira Gyro GYRO.
Okay. I had to write that down. Okay.
So check them out. Um, in the gospel space, Ricky Diller, and
Okay.
they kind of have this theme of relevance and longevity. I think the musicians and groups that I'm really attracted to um, have remained relevant. I think over time,
Mm-hmm.
and they've had longevity. And
Mm-hmm.
Ricky Diller is an artist that have just remained relevant,
Yes.
um, and have remained consistent and authentic in style, and kind of this commitment to the choir music, but has
Mm-hmm.
led the evolution of that over the years. Um, and then probably my last on that list would be Ella Fitzgerald. In kind of depth of messaging and language,
Right.
and
Right.
impact of language. Because I think when you think about her legacy,
Right.
there's always a lyrical connection, and I think it's
Right.
a lot of intentionality to language in her music.
That's oh wow. That's a very eclectic. I like that. For me, if we're doing mixed genre, I like that. I'm going to use that. So for me, in terms of like when I think about old school music, I think about Otis Redding.
Okay.
So sitting on the dock of the bay, it's just a powerful song. And when I think about like connection with my grandmother, driving down to North Carolina, family reunion, sitting on the dock of the, I was like, Grandma, you know this? She was like, yes, of course. Um, I also, in terms of hip hop, um, I love Jay-Z. I love his confidence. He came into hip hop a little bit older at 26 at the time. Um, in terms of um, like overall, I think in terms of like a woman artist, Beyonce. I love Beyonce, like everyone loves Beyonce. But just her evolution and as she's always attempting to grow and change and learn more. Um, And her mom is always on I follow her mom on Instagram, so it's great. I would also say in terms of like gospel, I don't really listen to a whole lot of gospel. For me, it just makes me think of church.
Mm,
And while I do love church, it makes me think of like shouting and like I don't even like to listen to gospel in the car because then I'm gonna start crying and all that.
yeah.
But in terms of gospel, I would say I don't necessarily have a particular artist, but I would say like quartets. Like I love the old school
Oh, cool.
quartet music.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then I would say in terms of like who else is like really I would say someone who's more recent, I have not included in a list before, is the rapper Lil Baby. He's
Mm,
really breaking genre conventions. He actually just did a song with Kirk Franklin um, for the Space Jam soundtrack. And the thing that I
oh,
love
cool.
about him is he's so transparent in his journey and in his growth. And he actually just came out with an album with the rapper Lil Durk. And he has a song called They have a song called Voices of the Heroes or something like that. And he talks about where he can basically learn from anyone, and
Mm,
so I appreciate that. In his interviews, even his body language is leaned in and open,
mm,
and he acknowledges how he's trying to get better. And I
yeah.
think in a genre that is so much about, machismo and all of that. And I will also throw in, because I think it's important to also think about women hip hop artists. Um, I would say that's more relevant now is Cardi B. People can
Mm.
say what she wants about, not writing her own raps and all of that, but I value her authenticity. But with that being said, we are concluding this episode. Again, I thank you so much for joining us for this amazing and life-changing conversation. But before we go, do you have any parting words for our audience?
I just, keep doing you. The world needs you. And so embrace your authenticity and, impact the world in every way possible.